Hey, good news everybody. Mishler Math is back online, and today we're going to talk about how to complete the square. This is an ongoing series of quadratics, and complete the square is what we're going to talk about today. So remember that if x squared equals 9, well then x equals plus or minus 3, because both plus 3 and negative 3 will give you 9. And if x plus 3 quantity squared equals 16, well, we find the square root of both sides and we say x plus 3 equals plus or minus 4. And if we subtract 3 from both sides, we say x equals plus 4 minus 3, which is 1, and x equals negative 4 minus 3, which is negative 7. So it's real easy to solve a perfect square like this. Now if you take that x plus 3 squared, well, that's x plus 3 times x plus 3, right? And that equals x squared plus, now you got 3x and x times 3, so 3x and 3x, 6x plus 3 times 3 is 9. So if you look at this, half of this middle term, if you take half of that and go x plus 3, okay, so you're factoring this, you take half of this and x plus 3 and square it to get this last one, well, then you can complete the square. You don't know what I'm talking about. Oh, that's okay. Let's try this. Let's try x squared plus 8x plus 16. Well, half of 8 is 4, isn't it? And 4 squared is 16. So we can factor that quite easily by saying x plus 4 squared. Okay? Because x times x, just like I did with the x plus 3 up here. X times x is x squared. X times 4 and 4 times x, well, that's 8x. You add those two together, you get 8x. And 4 squared is 16. So you've got a basic idea here that if you take half of this middle term and square it, and you get the last term, well, then you have a perfect square trinomial. And so we have a general form we're talking about for that. The general form is this: x plus bx plus b divided by 2 times, or squared, equals x plus b over 2 quantity squared. Now again, if this doesn't make sense to you right away, that's okay, hang in there. We're going to show you a couple examples of how we use this information to solve solve a quadratic equation. So let's start with a nice one here. Let's try x squared plus 6x. Okay, or excuse me, x squared minus 6x. Sorry about that. X squared minus 6x. So I want to complete the square. Okay, I want to turn this into a perfect square trinomial. And how do I do that? The first one, look at b. Okay, remember ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, this is b. So what is b? Equals negative 6, right? The second one, you say, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go b over 2. What does that equal? Negative 3. Then the third one is b over 2 squared. Well, this is negative 3 squared equals 9. So what does that mean? That means that if I just add 9 to this, x squared minus 6x plus 9, well, then I can factor that. That's a perfect square trinomial. And I can factor that into x minus 3 squared. Okay? Try another one. This is a little bit more complicated, and so we're going to have to use yellow on this one because it's more complicated. Ha ha ha. X squared plus 15x. Remember, the first thing we do, b equals 15. The second thing we do is 15 over 2. Okay? And then the third thing we do is 15 over 2 quantity squared. Now, rather than multiply this out, I'm just going to leave it in this form and change this. I'm going to say x squared plus 15x plus 15 over 2 squared equals, watch, x plus 15 over 2 quantity squared. Isn't that cool? And so what can I do with all this? What does this all mean? Well, I'm going to show you. We're going to use it to solve quadratic equations. Okay, so for example, let's look at x squared and x squared plus 6x minus 16 equals 0. Some of you might be smart enough to tell me that yes, you can factor this. Well, I know I can factor this, but we're not going to factor it now because we're learning to do completing the square. So, what's the first thing we do? First thing I do is change form into something I can use completing the square on. Okay, what does that mean? That means I'm going to add 16 to both sides. And I get x squared plus 6x minus, or excuse me, equals 16. So I added 16 to both sides. And the reason I did that is just I want these first two terms on the left. Okay? And let's change color here. 2. I want to complete the square. That's the second thing I'm going to do. Just like we did a few moments ago. I'm going to take half of this and square it and add that. X squared plus 6x plus 9. I just turned this into a perfect square trinomial. You say, well, wait a minute. What do you do? You added 9 to this side. You have to add 9 to the other side. You're exactly correct. So you have to say 16 plus 9, and that's, of course, going to be 25. But the next thing we do is we factor. Okay, and that means we're going to go x plus 3 quantity squared equals 25. And then you know what we do after that. We solve. And that means we take the square root of both sides. X plus 3 equals plus or minus 5. We subtract 3 from both sides. We have x equals plus 5 minus 3 is 2. Negative 5 minus 3 is negative 8. So there's my solution. X equals 2 and negative 8. And isn't that lovely? We're going to do even more. Okay, so let's try one more here. We got 2x squared plus 6x equals 7. And we're going to show you how to solve this using completing the square. And the first thing I want to do is, well, 2 times x squared plus 3x. And the reason for that, completing the square doesn't work with 2x squared on the front. So I'm going to get rid of that 2 on the front there, and that means I have to do this. Okay, equals 7. So now I divide by 2. Okay, so x squared plus 3x equals 7 halves. Okay, and so now I'm going to complete the square on the left side here. And x squared plus 3x, this is 3 over 2 plus 3 halves squared equals 7 halves plus 3 halves squared. Again, I'm leaving it kind of in this form, make it a little bit easier. And so then I can factor. X plus 3/2 quantity squared equals 7/2 plus 9/4, because 3 squared and 2 squared is 9/4, and that equals 23/4. So, going back up to the top here, I'm going to say, so taking the square root of both sides, I have x plus 3/2 equals plus or minus the square root 23/4. Now, you know, I can simplify this because I can say this is plus or minus the square root of 23 over the square root of 4, which is plus or minus the square root of 23/2. So x plus 3/2 equals the square root, or excuse me, plus or minus square root of 23/2. So now I'm going to subtract 3/2 from both sides. And so x equals negative 3/2 plus or minus the square root of 23/2. And if I simplify that further, I can say they have the same denominator. So I can say negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 23/2. Now this is my solution right here. I've got two values in there because I got a plus or a minus. And so now I'm just going to do things the easy way. I'm going to pull a calculator up and calculate, because remember, this is my exact answer, okay? But I also want rounded to the nearest hundredth, okay? Because usually it tells me, give me an exact answer and the answer rounded to the nearest hundredth. So let's see what I can come up with here with my calculator. I go negative 3. I'm going to make it I'm going to put this whole top line inside parentheses. And this is where I use this little negative in the parentheses here. Negative 3 plus, I can't do plus or minus on this calculator, so let's say negative 3 plus square root of 23, close the square root bracket and close the big bracket, and then divide this by 2. Alright, and enter, and I get 0.90. Now, take a look here again. Remember, when I round this off, I have to use 2 decimals. I can't say 0.9. I have to say 0.90. And now I'm going to just second enter, put the same equation or the same thing in there again, and just change this plus sign to a negative, because this is plus or minus the square root of 23/2. So I hit enter, and I get a negative 3.90. So comma negative 3.90. And while we got the calculator out, let's try one more thing, and that is, let's try using this to check our answer. You see, I already put 2x squared. You know, our original formula over here, original equation over here was 2x squared plus 6x equals 7. Now I can always use a calculator to double check my answer simply by putting this, making this y1 and 7 y2. And so I do that, and I graph this equation. I already did that, but here's the graph of those two equations, okay? And there's a graph of 2x squared plus 6x, and of course here's a graph of y equals 7. So I look for the intersection. So I go second, calc, okay? You know that calculate menu by now. And so I get on to number 5, which is intersection. And so the first curve, and my cursor, I want my cursor to be near. It doesn't give me arrows on the intersection. It just, you want the cursor to be near the intersection. So enter, 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 and I get negative 3.89 and negative 3.90. And then second calc, 5 intersection, move the cursor over to the right. So it's very near this other intersection. Enter, 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 and there's my intersection, x equals 0.90, which is exactly what I had here. That's all I have for you today. Let's talk about it more in class. Thank you very much.